Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier, the host of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the South Coast Artist Index. And our guest today, and I always tend to say that the guests are special. They are. They're all special in each in their own way, and without any disparaging leanings. I mean, they're all like snowflakes, all the guests are very, very different from each other. But in this particular case, our next guest is only the third of a group that I belong to called Tecum, which is Togneri, Elliott, Cummings, and McCoy, the four fathers, so to speak, of our BFA program at the then Southeastern Massachusetts University. Their BFA program. There wasn't even a college of visual and performing arts at that time. And he is also the second of the original. The one of the three guests was we adopted him. And that's Bob Dec. In case you're listening, Bob, that's you. So as I normally do with our guests, could you please introduce yourself and spell your name?
Oh, my name is Bob Dec, formerly Robert Dec. Last name is Dec. I don't think I really need to spell my first name. I think most people can figure that out.
But do people ever put a K on it?
All the time. As a matter of fact, when I'm talking to somebody on the phone or we're doing some paperwork at a service desk or something like that, I will say my name is Robert Dec, D-E-C, and they will inevitably go, "Oh, D-E-C-K?" And I'm like, "No, I just said D-E-C." It's actually, believe it or not, it's a Polish name that has never been shortened.
Really?
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of genealogy research in the past few years, and there are over 6,000 Decs in Poland, and there's another 3,000 or 4,000 in the United States.
So that would be an envious name in Poland.
Yeah,
when you consider some of the huge long names that they have.
Yeah, well, I've traced it all the way back to the 1790s. So, but there are some other short Polish.
Right. Do people also think it sounds crazy? But I love this part of the show. I don't know why, because everybody's usually has a little story. Even the ones that you think have there's nothing there. They'll come up with something, and it's important. Your name is important. Do people think it's an abbreviation for December?
Oh yeah, that is getting back to the genealogical research. That is a major problem because if you try to Google anything with the last name Dec, you're going to come up with December all the time.
Yeah,
you're looking at records, as a matter of fact, it's even more complicated that my great-grandfather's first name was Jan, J-A-N. So if I try to Google something for him, Jan Dec, I get all kind of things for January and December. So,
this is going to be the best one yet. So, Bob, let's go back. I got so many questions, and one of the other questions I want to ask you is, well, there's two fond memories. One of them is Loretta's, your parents' variety store, which people I don't think know what a variety store is. And the other thing too is I remember a story vividly of you telling me that every morning you had to go walk by this famous murder scene in Fall River history, and that you always felt a little creeped out doing that. Could you tell us about that?
Well, it wasn't every morning, but a lot of times, like I had a paper route when I was a kid and whatever, and I'd often drive by there, and when I was old enough, drive by there. I would often walk by there, but that was the Lizzie Borden Bed, which is now the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, or I think they're trying to sell it now, or they sold it or something like that. So that was a
Yeah. I should have predicated that and said on your way to school, because I remember you told me it was on your way to school.
Well,
That,
not,
yeah.
it wasn't, it's like on the opposite way. It was
Mhm.
basically about 4 blocks from my parents' house.
Okay. All right.
When I was heading to downtown for anything, you know,
Okay.
but
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
not
so
that
the,
I ever wanted to stay in a place where somebody got murdered, but a lot of people.
yeah, it's like one of those things, you just, um, but did it affect your life anyway?
Not really. Um, I don't know. It's when I lived in Fall River until basically I graduated from SMU, or UMass Dartmouth as it's now called. And I was pretty much oblivious to things like that. I just had my own teenage issues to deal with.
Hmm.
It was just had a lot of, it was a inner city neighborhood, but it was a real nice neighborhood. It was a lot of fun. We'd,
Yeah. 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 It was.
we'd play all day until it got dark, until you hear your mother calling you from halfway across the block, yelling out for you to come home and eat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the uh, Rock and Bedford streets were like the epicenter of that whole neighborhood.
Yeah, I was a block away from
Yeah.
well, and 2 blocks from Bedford Street. So.
Yeah. Yeah. When did you get bit by the bug of being an artist, and how did you get to SMU?
Well, um, I just love to draw and paint I can't tell you an exact time when I was a kid where I to put it in your words, to get bit by the bug, but I just love to draw and paint ever since I was a kid. And talking about playing with the kids in the neighborhood, every day you'd meet and you think, well, what do you want to do today? You want to play some stickball or what, make some roads in the neighbor's gravel driveway with our toy uh, tractors and stuff like that. And I was the only one that would say, hey, you guys want to paint and draw? And everybody else was like, no, are you kidding? I don't want to do that. And, I don't think I was very successful in having that happen as a play date very often back then. But on my own, I just really like to paint and draw. And my father, although he ran that grocery store for 31 years, and before that he ran a bar and grill and off of Bedford Street, actually, Bedford Street and Plymouth Avenue in Fall River.
What was it called? Just saw the record.
Sandex, SAN. DEC. It was a combination of the two names of the owner, the co-owners of the bar. But my father used to draw pictures for me a lot, and he was actually really good at it. He never really pursued it, never really did anything with it. But I was always amazed at how I can remember. I specifically remember the sailboats he would draw, and I'm not sure if that inspired me or not, but it's just something I always felt like doing. So I ended up doing a lot of it when I was a kid in my spare time. And then I ended up going to Durfee High School, which didn't really have much of an art program. I mean, I didn't even know who Picasso or Cezanne was until basically I got to SMU. The art teacher that I had was at Durfee. Basically, was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and I remember the kids used to take advantage of that by just while she was sitting at her desk, they'd just basically be throwing out materials at her. And our assignments were to draw a pumpkin for Halloween, to draw a turkey for Thanksgiving. We never really learned anything about art. It was, although I did enjoy going because I just enjoyed doing art. So basically, I just drew and painted what I wanted.
Do you remember applying at SMU and
Yes,
any other places? Yeah.
Yes, I do. I did apply to Mass College. Back then, you didn't apply to 17 colleges like the kids do today. I think I just applied there in Mass College of Art. I didn't get into Mass College of Art. And since most of my work that I submitted was pretty much copies from photographs, because I just didn't know any better, or copies of other artworks like Hallmark cards and stuff like that. When Professor Ted Mead, who was the first person I met there, who was the person that actually reviewed my portfolio, saw it, and he said, well, these aren't bad, but we need to see what your observation skills are. So he gave me an assignment of objects to draw, like, draw an egg beater and pick an object, which was my much loved stereo earphones at the time that I drew and all that. And so I think I drew about 6 of those, just basically with the pencil, and I submitted them. And to make a super long, but a long story short, I got accepted, and Ted Mead ended up, I think it was in my junior year, becoming my photography teacher and one of my favorite professors there.
Yeah, he was a kind and gentle man.
That's how I ended up there.
Classy. I mean, I know that's like you think of some guy with a pencil mustache and from the word classy of those days, but he just had a lot of class. He was very he wore that gray lab coat, if I remember correctly, and he had his pipe. He was just a lovely man.
And he, it's funny how just fate ends up determining how your life evolves. But I mean, in other places, like, Mass College of Art, for one thing, they probably just looked at the portfolio I sent in and said, forget it. But he gave me that second chance, He said, why don't you, try some observational drawing? Because I didn't even know. I mean, there weren't even any instructions that I remember back then of what to submit for a portfolio. And he gave me that chance. And,
I was lucky because my Dartmouth High School art teacher was Francisco Raposa. He was a professional artist. He was a former instructor at the Swain School of Design. And he's the one that sort of encouraged me to apply. And he said, hey, this is what you got to do. And he did exactly what Ted Mead asked you to do. He said, you've got to do a landscape, a self-portrait, a mechanical object. It was a standard thing at the time.
Right.
What are your first memories of class and instructors and such from SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, for people who don't know what SMU stands for? Because I don't know about you, but I got sick and tired of telling people, no, it wasn't Southern Methodist University.
Yeah. Same thing, especially when I went to grad school in New York. Everybody would ask me that. One of my first and kind of funniest memories, and I don't even know if you were in that class, was one of the drawing classes that we had. And I think it was Togneri that taught that class. It was one of the foundation classes. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but he said we were going to have a model that day. And once again, being absolutely naive from my lack of art education in high school, I actually had absolutely no idea that it was a nude model until this woman got up and went on the stand and took all her clothes off. And I probably wasn't the only one in the class that was in that situation, because there were probably about 4 or 5 of us with our jaws wide open when we saw that. So, but I can remember a lot of, of course I had Bill Elliott telling us things like to draw things from the inside out, and having us make drawings or paintings, whatever you call them, with wheat paste, which ended up turning into a great joke among members of our class. Later on, I can remember, what was his name? Not Pete Rose.
Michael Rose.
Michael Rose. Pete Rose is the baseball player.
Yeah. He looked like the actor from Bonnie and Clyde. I think his name was also Michael. Very, curly hair, reddish hair. Yeah. He was a little crazy, I think.
Yeah, he was. And
Michael J. Pollard.
He didn't pull any punches in his critiques either, but did have some fun projects in that class. I loved the cartooning assignment that we had. And we had another one where we had to construct a box in which you had to put some type of object of material, and where when you came in for the critique, people had to put their hand in the box and figure out what was inside there. So
The feely mealy box, I think.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff was, like I said, being so naive. It was a lot of fun for me to do that stuff. And another first impression I had, especially with Rose and Elliot, is getting ripped in critiques because I didn't know what the hell I was doing for the most part. And my first year, I started college when I was 17, and I was pretty immature. I probably really should have taken a year off because I knew somewhat that I was there to study art, but I also thought it was half of it was supposed to be party time. So I didn't really get that serious about my work until my junior year, when I decided, well, I think maybe I better straighten out and try to do something with my life. So.
Yeah. Well, those are interesting times, for sure, with the riots and the assassinations and the war protests, and then there was the May Day celebration on campus where it was free chicken, free fried chicken and beer, which I don't know what that combination was from, and it was. Then there were the strikes, the student strikes, and I remember.
Remember that? Yeah.
I think the student senate president slapped the chancellor in the face at the doorway to what we called Group 1. It's now called LARTS, for Liberal Arts Building. And so you just really never knew what was going to go on. Do you remember? I believe could have been our senior year, might have been our junior year, during the fuel embargo or the fuel crisis. It was the first intercession ever where they shut down the university, but they allowed us to get in the building and there was no heat on because.
Yeah, I can remember something about that. One thing that was unique about that time period was the fact that the drinking age was 18 at the time, and it was basically, at the time we went there, was a commuter campus. I think they were just starting to build dorms then. Mm-hmm. And they had a bar on campus, the Rathskeller. Now, when you think back to that, thinking of young, immature people drinking and then driving back to their homes or their apartments or wherever they are, probably wasn't all that good of an idea. But I mean, that's just the way it was back then.
Yeah, I still remember, the Rathskeller, which everybody just called the Rat Cellar.
The Rat Cellar, yeah.
And the Tuborg beer, I think it was a pitcher of beer for $2.50.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, that particular space, which it's next door to the campus bookstore, reeked of the smell of stale beer for years.
Yeah, that's funny.
But anyway, moving on. Going into getting prepared for grad school, and I do remember a story. I don't know why I remember things the way I do, but I do remember, like, when you went to the grad school you went to, and you were unloading your car and you put down your stereo. That was like the last time you saw it. But anyway. Maybe my memories bump a little.
That wasn't me, but
that wasn't you. Okay.
No, but I mean, I did go to Columbia, which was next to a neighborhood which really wasn't all that great. I mean, the Morningside Heights neighborhood around Columbia was fairly safe, but our studios were down on 125th Street, and used to have to walk down there at night. And one of my best friends there when I was in New York in grad school, Jim, he was walking down to that studio one night and he got mugged. He actually basically got dragged into the bushes, punched in the face a couple of times, and his wallet stolen. And luckily that's all that happened to him. I walked by the very same spot probably a half hour after that, going down to my studio. And there were other people that, particularly a woman would get harassed going down there all the time, and other people that actually got, I think there were maybe one other one that I knew of that got mugged. And people always left me alone. And another friend of mine was an African American. He was a sculptor. He was concentrating on sculpture in grad school, and we were talking about that, and I said, I don't know why, but I walk by the same spot that this keeps happening, and people leave me alone. At the time, my hair was really long. It was down on my shoulders. I had a full beard. I was wearing one of remember the snorkel jackets with, those green snorkel jackets?
Yeah. With the orange, international orange interiors.
Usually would have that going around the back of my head or whatever. And he says to me, he says, "You know why people leave you alone?" He says, "You look like an undercover cop. You look like Serpico."
Who knew? Really?
And so you better believe I kept up that look for the rest of the time that I was there.
Yeah. No, I thought I remembered you saying something about the very first day you got there. You were unloading your car to go to wherever your stuff was going to go into, and something just disappeared right there.
No, that wasn't me.
All right.
Maybe it was somebody else.
Yeah. So now you're at Columbia, and not bad for a kid who had to be given a second chance at SMU because and it's not making light of it, but it had an art instructor with Alzheimer's who pretty much had a curricula that was similar to elementary school turkeys for Thanksgiving and pumpkins.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Exactly. So now you're at Columbia, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
What affected you there? Your artwork. I mean, when did you think you started to evolve? Because I remember you were in senior year were very, very taken by Diebenkorn. Was it Diebenkorn? Okay, hey, I got one right.
and Cezanne as well.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the story about how I ended up at Columbia. Applying to grad schools, I applied to six different grad schools, Syracuse, University of Cincinnati. I guess there was this thing about the University of Cincinnati where we were encouraged by our instructors at SMU to apply there because everybody was getting accepted there. Well, I ended up having the honor of probably being the first student applying there that wasn't accepted there. And strangely enough, for Columbia and all its reputation, it was the only grad school that I ended up getting into. I applied to 6 grad schools. I got 5 straight rejections, and letter came in from Columbia, and I was kind of like, well, here we go. There's probably another one. And then it told me I got accepted there. And so I can remember driving home I actually had my mail from Columbia sent to my girlfriend who became my wife, to Sue's house for financial aid purposes. And I can remember driving all the way back home from Fall River, to Fall River from Dartmouth, blowing my horn and, screaming and yelling in the car like crazy. And people probably were wondering who this nut was coming down the highway, because I just couldn't believe it. How I ended up getting into Columbia, it was definitely not my academic brilliance. I mean, I ended up doing pretty well, since the end of my sophomore year, making the dean's list every year at SMU. But I mean, in Columbia, you wouldn't even be able to get in there now unless you have extremely high honors. It was basically because when I got there, I found out that the majority of the instructors were landscape painters who painted very much in the same style that I did. So put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah.
They looked at my work and they were probably like, "Oh, I like this guy's work. Something familiar about it that I like." And so that's how I ended up there. And,
wow.
And then, of course, as I got there, which was, of course, called the Boston accent. I was always always getting made fun of. I don't know if you went through the same thing.
Yeah, in the University of Miami, yeah. But now I'm accused of having a New York accent. For the 6 years I lived there, yeah.
So anyways, getting back to your question about what really started things, it really was in my junior year at SMU that I really started to see things. I listened to your podcast yesterday just to get more of an idea of what this was all about. And I can remember you talking about Frank McCoy and talking about seeing things in terms of large shapes. And basically, I started seeing things in shape, in terms of large shape. I've been always attracted towards landscape. I've always loved the landscape. I've always loved photographing it, looking at it, being in it. And I wanted to express it. And it just got to a point where this whole large shape thing that Frank McCoy was encouraging, the way that he was encouraging us to think. I can remember, and it still happens to me. I'd be driving down a highway or something like that, and looking at, or being a passenger in a car being driven down the highway, and looking at the landscape, looking at the trees, no matter what the season was, particularly when there was leaves on the trees, and I wasn't even seeing trees anymore. I was seeing shapes. It was just sort of that way of thinking. That's one thing. One thing led to another, and even after I became a teacher, I started doing the exact same thing that you did. I started teaching art, and it was actually very effective, as you probably found out. Talking the kids into not trying to draw every little detail that they saw, but if you want to draw trees, you're not going to draw every leaf. You're going to be there. You're in school. You have an hour class, an hour art studio to do this in high school. You want to draw things in clumps. You want to draw things in terms of shape. And they started. Well, the ones that listened, anyways, started doing the same thing that I did, and they met some success in their artwork as well.
The best part of teaching for me, and unfortunately I didn't get the ability to teach as much and as long as you did, was always a struggle. That's one of the disappointments in my life, my career, is that, because I really thought I was a good teacher. I ended up teaching marketing instead. But one of the things I loved about teaching art was I tend to think out loud. So teaching, because I remember a couple of things happening in class, and one of them was a Frank McCoy moment. I got a little frustrated with the class, and I said, look, it's really very simple. You have to look for the big flat shapes.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God, he's in the room.
That's influenced me. It's still influenced, and I'm sure it does you too.
Yeah.
Still to this day. Another thing that was always amazed me about teaching is, particularly teaching art, is how involved you get in your students' work, and when it's completed, and particularly if it's a success, you almost feel like you did it too.
Especially the ones that just like take your breath away, and you go, oh my God, because you always want your students to be way better than you ever were.
Yeah, but it's not like I wouldn't say this to them, but I would think this to myself. Not that, okay, this looks pretty good, I think you're done. But what I would think to myself is, this looks pretty good, I think we're done. Which was very satisfying.
Yeah. Did you ever have those experiences in the classroom where you just looked at their eyes at the right moment, and that the light finally went on, they finally understood what it was you were trying to say? Yeah, and then it's like such a phenomenal moment standing up.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
What I would usually do is, I don't know if it embarrassed the kid that did so well, but I don't think it should have, because I would pretty much call the rest of the class over and say, look what he or she did. That's the way you do this. Yes. You got to think, It's, it's this whole thing too, the Betty Edwards book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Yeah.
And it's another part of my teaching and working philosophy has been, and this all started because it was basically the same thing they were teaching us at SMU, is don't draw what you think, draw what you see.
Well, in fact, I'd love to be able to do a series of podcasts with former students of Togneri, Elliott, Cummings, and McCoy, because they instill a couple of things in us that, first of all, a spirituality, a zenness to drawing, which I found when I was at the University of Miami, they were totally like, where did you guys go to school?
Yeah.
It was that kind of like astounded feeling that they had, but Cummings specifically was hung up on Nicolaides, the natural way to draw.
Right.
But they all, and that was one great thing about them all, is that they were all on the same page, or they were all in the same book, but each one of them took different chapters. Frank was about the big flat shapes. Elliott was about the tactility, the push and pull of it. Togneri was about, I always would tell my drawing students, I don't want you to be the waltzing Melendez. I don't want you to be peek, remember, draw. Peek. I want you to see and draw at the exact same time. It is possible. And I caught Togneri in so many antics. He would yell at us, and then I would catch him in the hallway because I had to go to the bathroom or something like that, and he would be leaning up against the wall laughing his ass off. And he would always look at me and point his finger and go, "Don't you dare tell him what I'm doing," because I don't know if you remember, he was really, really frustrated with us because we were looking, photographing, memorizing, whatever you want to call it, and then drawing instead of looking and drawing, right? And he set up the model down the hallway in an empty studio away from us, and he made us go look at the model and come back and draw her.
I remember that.
Remember, and we were like going up and down the hallway.
I think I was in the same class as you.
Exactly. So
I'll never forget that.
Yeah. So all of those experiences, I remember, my ex-wife, when I first found out I was going to be teaching solo. I was supposed to be an assistant, but the instructor Jim Wilson became ill, and I ended up becoming the instructor of record. And I was like, what the hell do I do? Right? She's like, just teach the way you were taught.
Yeah, well, I mean, I ended up teaching figure drawing in college because I've also, besides teaching high school, and I taught at every level, elementary, middle, and high school, but I pretty much started out as a visiting lecturer at Westfield State College and Bay Path Community College when Sue was going to UMass, Amherst, and the Museum School of the Springfield, the George Walter Vincent Smith's College of Art in Springfield, and the Springfield art museums, but getting back to what you were saying, another thing Bill Elliott would promote in learning how to draw the figure was gesture. He was very big, and I learned gesture drawing from him, and I learned how important that was, because it's not just drawing what you see; it's also drawing what you feel. It's that other part of it, and that the Zen thing you were talking about too is and most artists. Our experience know that when you're really going with your artwork, you pretty much lose your mind in it. Sometimes you just emerge from a painting session and you're like, you shake your head and like, where the hell was I? But I mean, that's an extremely important part of doing the work and hopefully doing it well.
Yeah, it's sort of like a weird fugue state where I still remember to this day. I was at SMU in the senior studio. I had a sandwich and a cup of coffee. And it was just at that point where I started to break out, because I always felt like I was the worst guy in the class. And then there was that woman named Cindy who everybody copied her because she got the thing of with the linseed oil and she would draw and then use linseed oil as a wash or whatever.
Right.
And we had a bunch of other very talented people, and I just felt lost. And but anyway, so now I was getting into these big pieces of work before the work that got me into University of Miami. And so I'm painting and I go reach for my sandwich and it felt dry. It's like, what the hell? And there's a bite out of it, but it's dry. Like the bread is kind of staling. It's like, that's kind of weird. I didn't notice that before. And then I go get my coffee because I had a sip of it and put it down and it was ice cold. I was like, holy crap, where the hell have I been? You know, I was like 3-4 hours had passed and I had no concept of time or anything else that was going on.
So anyway, getting back to your former question about the formative years, photography is also, I've also loved to express myself in photography, and I like to consider myself a photographer as well. I actually taught photography at Bancroft School in Worcester to middle and high school students for probably 15 years of the 31 years I was there, and it was darkroom photography. I was basically teaching the same thing that Ted Mead taught me how to do, and it became an important part of my work. When I went to Columbia, they didn't really have photography. They didn't have a darkroom. They didn't really have that opportunity. So I basically did a lot of work in printmaking. They didn't really have a major in printmaking or a minor in printmaking at that time, but I practically did because I spent a lot of time in the printmaking studio, and a lot of the time that I spent there was it's a very technique driven medium, and sometimes I would get so wrapped up in it that I was kind of losing the focus of my work, and I finally by the time I had graduated at Columbia, I pretty much had it with printmaking, and I pretty much said that I don't even know if I ever want to do this again. Just between the several years that we learned how to do the different techniques at SMU and Columbia, I well, maybe I just need a break from it or whatever. I basically never really did it again except for teaching some techniques in high school.
I remember Bill Elliott telling me that we as students of printmaking would never ever be successful until we burned right straight back to the back of the plate. And he said, when you got to that point, then that's when you know everything you need to know. I always found I was like a strange kind of a thing to say,
Yeah.
So now, one of the things too is over the years, hearing about you, I mean, your drive and tenacity were like phenomenal. I mean, you just rattled off a whole bunch of what you had, fellowships or whatever. I mean, for the guy who only applied to a couple of places for undergrad and for 6 places, which like today is like nothing, for graduate school, I mean, you must have been like constantly ferreting out opportunities for teaching and everything.
Well, it's I just had the drive. It's what I wanted to do. I figured that I wouldn't make enough money to support myself and later my family and my wife with just my artwork. And while I was at Columbia, I ended up learning that I actually was a pretty good teacher because I ended up getting a work study job at the Trinity School, which was a private school very similar to the Bancroft School where I taught for 30 years in New York, maybe about 10 blocks or so from Columbia, where I was an assistant woodworking teacher. And I learned I was pretty good at it. And so
I mean, Trinity's a pretty prestigious private school, or was.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah. The Bancroft School, how did you get in there?
Well, that's an interesting story as well, because as I told you, my wife went to UMass Amherst, and she was a plant and soil sciences major with a minor in gerontology. And she ended up getting a...
Oh, sorry, I just made this bizarre connection between soil and gerontology.
Well, here's your connection right here is that she ended up getting an internship at Colony Retirement Homes in Worcester she became an intern for the activity director there. and they had a horticultural therapy program and a greenhouse. So that's how that came together.
Wow.
And about 2 years into that internship, when she graduated from UMass Amherst with her degrees in both, and she ended up getting the job there as the activities director. One of the residents there came up to her with an ad from the Worcester Telegram and Gazette that said they were looking for an art and a woodworking teacher at this place, which I never heard of before, called the Bancroft School in Worcester. And well, I was an assistant woodworking teacher, and I had plenty of experience in art. I had also taught art in summer camps and stuff like that. Matter of fact, I taught one in Fairhaven. It was called Camp. It was a Jewish summer camp, Camp Tikva Little Bay. I can remember we made a replica. I made a replica of the kids of the Wailing Wall, where we would stick little notes and stuff like stuff like that in it. But anyway, to make a long story short, I applied for that job, and I got it. And 34 years later, I retired from there.
Wow. Wow. It's kind of a serendipitous life for you, Bob.
Yeah, it really is. And the point that I was trying to make before about how my artwork came into doing what I'm doing now is, as I said, I had it with printmaking. I've always enjoyed photography. I've always been trying to figure out how to relate my photography, except just basing my work on it as an active part of my paintings. And so thus I discovered the technique. Well, not the first one I discovered, but I learned how to do the technique of photo transfer, which was just exactly what I was looking for. And I said I really wasn't going to do any printmaking anymore, but when you're doing photo transfers, guess what you're doing? It's a printmaking technique. So now I'm combining printmaking, photography, and painting all together, and that's how my work ended up the way that it is. And it's actually became a driving factor in my work, because the photo transfers pretty much lead the painting or the finished artwork or whatever you want to call it in its own direction. However the transfer comes out, and it's very much like printmaking. You don't know what you're going to get until the transfer is made from the plate to the canvas. And that's basically that board that I'm putting photo transfer on. That's my printing plate. And so whatever I end up with, I just run with it. And it's caused what may be considered some inconsistencies in my work, that keeps going back and forth from very abstracted or almost fully abstract to fairly realistic. But it all depends on which way the photo transfer drives the work. I just get it and I run with it. I really don't have any I have no preconceived notions whatsoever of what I want it to look like.
So you're just going with the flow, so to speak. You're learning. Yeah. You're allowing it to carry you
right
to its.
When I see the photo transfer, that's when I start doing somewhat of a plan in my mind of where I want it to go, what I want it to look like, and half the time it doesn't end up coming looking like that either. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just it's kind of like the serendipity that you talk about, which is the story of my life, which I guess I didn't think of until right now. It all ties things together. I'm just, once again, just going with the flow.
Sort of like the Forrest Gump of art. Yeah. And I mean that in a because that's a whole nother story. I mean, I love that movie, but I mean, there is this thing about this just going with the flow. You're just don't fight the flow.
The Forrest Gump of art. I should put that on my website.
So we got about 10 more minutes or so. What's next for you? Or do you know? because you go, since you're going with the flow. I mean, you got to know what the flow is, right?
Yeah.
What's the flow?
Well, I started doing smaller works. We're and I was thinking that it's kind of appropriate that I'm on a podcast called The South Coast Artist, because I'm originally from the South Coast. I moved away from the South Coast, living in Belchertown and Worcester for the bulk of my life. But now that I'm retired from teaching, and my wife is retiring from it's kind of sounds redundant, but she's retiring from the retirement home
Yeah.
this summer. Where are we moving to? Well, back to the South Coast. We're moving to our place in Westport. So, I'm just basically planning on continuing my interest in music, and I, as you well know, I've been in rock and roll bands. Also, I've been a
Yeah. Could you tell the folks at home, so to speak,
about for the past 10 years, I've been the keyboard player and the band manager for the Petty Larceny Band, which is a Tom Petty tribute band. I was in several cover bands before that. I was in a Rolling Stones tribute band. I was in a Bruce Springsteen cover band, and just general classic rock cover bands. And music ends up being an important part of my work too. And it's interesting too that one thing seems to inspire the other for me, because as I'm doing my artwork, I'm listening to music which I'm really enjoying, which makes me feel like playing that music. And as a matter of fact, I'm learning how to play the guitar as well right now, teaching myself how to play the guitar. But so either on the keyboards or on the guitar. A lot of times when I'm done with a painting session, I'll take a little break, and then I'll start playing. A lot of times inspired by a lot of the music that I heard. And while I'm painting, I have my keyboard set up in my studio here downstairs. I'm going to do the same thing in Westport. I have it set up so I can look at my paintings while I'm playing. So at the same time, I guess it's somewhat sort of mental multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
The same time I'm playing music, I'm evaluating my artwork, and I'm like, yeah, well, that's something I need to do. And then I'm, after finishing a practice session with my musical instruments, I'm back to the artwork that I just was kind of inspired to work on some more while I was playing music. So, and as far as the direction of my artwork is concerned, I've been doing smaller works for a practical reason now, because as one who has moved knows before, you don't want to keep piling more stuff up in your house when you're about to start packing things up to move. So when you're doing like 8x10, 9x12 paintings, they're a lot easier to move than a whole bunch of 3x4 foot or 3x6 foot canvases. So, but when I do get to Westport, I'm planning on working larger again. I do want to do what I was doing with the more abstract work, where I was collaging materials down before. I did the photo transfer. I would do the photo transfer on like a newspaper and paint collage, and I would get a really interesting combination of textures and shapes and colors that way. And as I told you before, some of them I've even taken a belt sand or two to roughen up the texture and do different things like that. So it's just another thing I enjoy doing as well.
All right, let's roll back to the beginning as we take this out to the end, if that makes any sense to you.
Okay.
In New Bedford specifically, which is the epicenter for the South Coast creative community, they've been recognized. I think in 2017 was the Commonwealth of Massachusetts declared New Bedford the most creative city in the Commonwealth. And I've had this conversation with a lot of other people, and they all say, well, it's got to go back to the Swain School, because we had our own art school here. And for some reason, either it's a combination of its presence and the lack of its presence that's driving everything, or a bunch of other variations. In Fall River, growing up, what art influences do you remember at all?
None.
None.
Once again, I was very, very naive, very uneducated. The only thing I ever heard of was the Fall River Art Association. I really didn't hear about that until I was made aware of some members' art contest that they had, which I entered and ended up getting into. But I just didn't know enough about it when I was in high school. I just was not taught about it. I just was not, I was pretty naive. I just was not aware of it. But it's interesting that you mentioned New Bedford and the Swain School of Design, because you're familiar with Gallery X.
Yes.
What is that, William Street?
William Street, correct. Yeah. Originally, they were in Spring.
Yeah, and the summer before this COVID thing hit, I was in several group shows there, and there were a lot of interesting artists I talked to who were also exhibiting there, and the people who ran the place. And inevitably, all the conversations came back to SMU and the Swain School of Design. So, I mean, I don't know as much as you about the New Bedford art scene.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that's that gallery is a fairly influential gallery right now, and a lot of people there be influenced by Swain and SMU.
Yeah, I mean, it is the only artist collaborative. It's celebrating, or soon to celebrate, its 30th anniversary. It is in a way an extension of the Swain School, because it was founded by Swain members.
Right.
And there's a lot of things there, and plus the fact that I wrote an article on them and called it Sanctuary. It's a place that a kid like you from Fall River, for example, who just loves to paint and draw, but really had no direction because there was nobody there to guide you.
Even in elementary school, I went to a Catholic elementary school.
Yeah.
Our art class.
Oh, wait a minute! Did you go to St. Stanislaus?
No. Actually, my parents did that. When my parents bought the store, when I was 3.5 years old.
Yeah.
So we moved to the Irish French neighborhood, so I went to Sacred Heart Elementary School. But we had basically no art instruction there either. I mean, we did have art time, but it was just you'd be throwing a bunch of crayons and some paper and say, "Okay, go draw."
Yeah. So here, the Gallery X was the sanctuary because it was. You want to put your stuff up on our walls? We've got our annual public hanging.
Right.
Have at it. So, yeah, I'm trying to think back. I don't know if you can remember the first time you ever saw your work hung in public. I'm actually thinking about it while I'm waiting for you to answer, if you can remember.
Well, we did have some art shows in high school. So I remember, because I was one of the better artists in the class. I used to have quite a few pieces in the show.
I mean, the only thing
I also have one painting that I did at home, but I brought in to show that art teacher. She actually improved my art, quote unquote, improved my artwork by painting some things on it herself.
Really?
And those paint marks are still there on that piece.
That's kind of cool. That's a great memory. Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap this up, and as I tell everybody, this is never a one and done, because first of all, we can't catch up in 50 years, in just an hour's time, and things are constantly evolving, and it is important, to use memory, because that's really what it all comes down to. It's all about memory. Mm-hmm. But as we're going, forward to wrap this up, what is one of the fondest memories that you have of SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, between the years of 1971 and 1975?
I don't know if you probably were there that night, but you can remember that when we were in the Group 1 building where the art studios were. And it was our senior year, I believe, and our thesis exhibition was coming up, and everybody was working, painting like crazy, trying to catch up on our academic subjects and all that. But in the studio, we would be there at night. We would work there till, a lot of times 10 or 11 at night. And downstairs there were academic classes going on, not for us, but for night school, for people who wanted to go to night school at SMU. And of course, we would have our music playing and whatever while we're painting. And I don't know how this started, but we decided to do the paint can shuffle, where we all started banging on the paint cans and whatever we could with our brushes and chanting, "It's the pressure, it's the pressure." We kept doing that over and over again. I can remember one of the professors from downstairs actually had to stop his class, leave, and come up and yell at us to be quiet because he was trying to teach a class. But it was kind of a way for us to let off steam, and to have fun together. And I mean that was kind of indicative of those years.
Yeah, the bonding was phenomenal. Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun. I mean, we did a lot of art. We learned a lot from each other. We inhaled a lot of fumes from the lead,
the black oil
medium that we were taught to use, and
I still check my gums for the purple line in the morning from all that lead that we were surrounded by.
Yeah, and I mean, we were also inhaling turpentine fumes as well. So I don't think the ventilation was anything near what the Star Store campus downtown.
No, the printmaking room was open vats of wood shavings soaked in kerosene, and open vats of hydrochloric acid. I mean, it's just they don't do that anymore.
And even in the dark room, I can remember Ted Mead showing us how to develop prints with his hands in the photochemicals. They didn't use tongs then.
No hypo.
I think he had us use tongs, thankfully, but he had his hands in the chemicals all the time.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I want to thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have.
I really have. It's actually some things that we've talked about have been a revelation to me about myself, which is good. It's good to work.
Yeah. It's just those experiences. Well, thank you so much. Well, folks, that wraps up another In Focus podcast. And the In Focus podcast is co-sponsored by Heavenly Spirits, and we thank them for their support and hope to have their continued support as well. And with that in mind, just remember, whatever you do out there, do it safely, and avoid getting sick from this nasty thing that's got the world in its grip. And be kind to each other out there. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.